Hi, everybody. Nice to see folks.
Hello.
We're going to wait for
Good
just a minute
afternoon.
here and get a couple more faces on the screen, and then we'll hop in on our content. Hope everybody's having a good afternoon. It's nice and sunny where I am. Snow is mostly melting. So now we have mud season. Wonderful mud season. Anybody here have that 52 inches? No, good. Okay.
One of
More the
our
10.
Innovation Fund colleagues was in Minneapolis for a convention last week and got stranded because of all the snow.
Oh, yeah. They grounded a lot of flights. A lot of flights. Wonderful. Well, we'll kick it off here. My name is Jane Tigan, for those who I haven't met yet, and I'm here with Erin Watson from Weaving Change. Erin, why don't you give a wave?
Hey.
We're here for our Collaborating for Action webinar series. This is the second of three. The first was on March 3rd with our coalition leads and co-leads. And then we have another version of this session on April 10th. So we're excited to be with you here today. And I'm going to just walk through a little bit of the expectations for the meeting. First, I'll say thank you for doing some of that light pre-work of selecting your 1 to 3 strategies and telling folks or telling us what your work group is that you're going to be using. We will be using that light pre-work, so hopefully you have it ready. If not, we have a couple of resources that we'll be able to share with you to help you give you a couple of strategies. Another expectation is that you'll have about just under 30 minutes of peer interaction time. I want to say we hear you in each one of our feedback surveys. We hear we want more time with our peers to make this real. And so we really tried to front load that in this session in particular so that you have time to grab onto what we're talking about and make it real for you. And you'll be in those work groups that you sent us in advance. You know, if you said you wanted to do childcare business and development, that's where you'll be. And then we are going to send out the deck that you're looking at here, resources and templates after the session. So yes, you will get the slides, and more than the slides, you'll have sort of a goodie bag of resources to go along with the slides to begin to integrate what we're talking about today into your day-to-day work. I just want to share that much of the work that we're going to be talking about today is based off of the change agent guide that Erin made specifically for the Regional Child Care Coalitions in November of 2025. If there's any area that you are really wanting to dive in deep on, this document is one great way to dive in deep. We're going to be going pretty high level today, just with the time that we have. It's not an exact one for one, but the content is really very supportive for you when you want to go into a little bit more detail. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have very actionable templates, meeting agendas, activities, that sort of thing that you'll have access to after. Okay, some of you have seen this slide before, but I think it's important for us to really ground ourselves with what we're doing today. So everybody in this room is involved in a systems change effort. These are big structural changes that we're trying to make in the childcare system. And what we know about fixing big challenges, both from research and for those of you who undoubtedly have been in this work for a while, from your experience, is first and foremost that nobody can do it alone. And secondly, we probably aren't going to get it right the first time. Those are those are hard realities, I think, for us as people who probably want to do things well and want to do it right the first time. And it's okay to say that's not the way this is going to work. It's important for us to acknowledge that and then to do something about it, right? So, since nobody can do it alone, we know that we need to collaborate with other people. That's collaborative capacity, really what it takes to work together. There is research that tells us what are the 5 things that we need in our coalitions in order to collaborate. And since we're not going to get it right the first time, we've got to get really good at learning and adapting and creating learning cycles and doing this in a way that's systematic. So today we're going to talk about learning and adaptation and how to try stuff out systematically. This isn't the same as barreling in without a plan and seeing what happens, you know. This is being intentional and getting ready to understand what happened and how to do it better next time. So just to get us started, if folks can hop into the chat, I'm going to give you a couple seconds here to just share with us what are the things that you do or tools that you use to learn and adapt in your work. I know many of you do this already. This is just a way for us to generate ideas together. So I'll give you a couple seconds here. Kathy says creating feedback loops intentionally as we implement. Yes, the cycling of, okay, what did we learn and then what should we do given what we've learned? Feedback forms for informal on the spot feedback. Yes, this is great. We oftentimes will use like a fist to 5 to say, is this working for you? Yes or no. Yes, so having these reflective cycles. Etta says, having the space to get feedback and process out loud, celebrating successes and why it worked. I love that, Etta. Celebrating successes is so important. Yes, proudly eat with your lunch on, absolutely. Although it's 2:30, I'm sorry that your lunch is so late. Listening sessions, wonderful. Okay, so these are all great examples of things that we can do to try stuff out systematically. Feel free to keep putting those in the chat. So today we're going to be talking about learning and adaptation. And to pull up the veil a little bit, we're also going to talk just a small amount about collaborative capacity, in part because I put this up here for one, folks who weren't at the March 3rd meeting where we talked about these collaborative capacities. I want you all to see what your regional leads are looking at and thinking about in the coalition, right? So these are these 5 factors of collaboration that are really the work and the stewardship of your co-leads and leads. We're going to be talking about vision, strategies, and goals today for the work group specifically. And then we'll spend most of our time on the adaptive learning cycle of understand, design, and act. We think on that left side about the air traffic controller, really having the big picture of collaborative health. Where are people? How are we doing? That is, as I mentioned, mostly the coalition lead's job. And if you're a work group lead, something for you to pay attention to on the work group side. But today we're going to be talking about the actual doing side. So one thing on that shared vision, we know from research that work group members or coalition members, but we're going to be thinking about this as the work group, really need to know why are we here? Where are we going and what are we going to do together? And they need to hear that message on repeat. Research tells us that those messages are extremely motivating for people. It's the reason why they get in the door. It aligns and bridges across diverse individuals and interests. You know, we know that not everybody in our work groups has the same portfolio of care, right? They care about different things. That's kind of what makes it strong. But we can say today, we're really putting our attention on this thing. And that's what can bridge across difference. And because, you know, we're human, there will be conflict. And so this can really, having clarity of statements on your vision, what you're doing, really can guide interactions when there is conflict. And I think one of the additional challenges or opportunities that a work group has is not just to say, what are we doing within the work group, but also what are we doing within the work group that aligns with the coalition, right? It's sort of, you have to port to that next level of vision. So there are lots of different ways to do this kind of work. I'm showing you up here some of the content that we've provided coalition leads to say, you know, does your coalition have a plan on a page, kind of a one pager that says, here's what we're doing. But we would encourage you also that work groups can do this as well. So here's a template, a fill in the blank that we have. And again, you'll have this later that really just says very high level. Our work group is working to what? What's the purpose of the work group? To achieve this, we will. What are the strategies or things that we're going to do? We are tracking, fill in the blank here, to tell us if we're making progress on our goals. And this is the priority for us because, and that's really an alignment question of, how does it link to the coalition's work? And also, how do you know that this is the work that you should be doing right now? By the end of this session, you'll have a lot of this content for your work group. So this is just the start of how we're going to talk about collaborative capacity. There's a lot of other work you could do with your work group, but this is sort of the main piece today. Throughout our session today, we are going to have Region 11. For those of you who are not familiar with the system, there is no actual Region 11 in Michigan. There are only 10 regions. So Erin and I have created a fictional hobbit of, Region 11 or land. So we're going to talk specifically about Region 11 and the municipal engagement group. So I'm just, as an example, going to walk you through Region 11's working group plan on a page. So the first to note here is that Region 11 Municipal Engagement Working Group is working to engage municipality and partners on restrictive zoning policies and redevelopment mechanics. That might sound familiar to some of you doing this work. To achieve this, we're going to conduct outreach to high impact cities, audit zoning policies, support and advocate for changes to restrictive policies, and reach out to developers and providers. We're tracking outreach calls, meetings, audits, policy changes, and businesses opened or expanded. You'll note that that's a mix of outputs and outcomes, if that's something that's a framing that you track. And then this is a priority for us because there's significant momentum, the potential for impact is great, the likelihood of systems change is very high, and the partnerships developed in this work can generate additional strategies. Meanwhile, there's interest across the region. So this is just one way that this might be filled out. So, Region 11 looks at this at the beginning of each of their sessions, includes it in their packets, etc. You'll also notice through the duration of this session that we actually pick apart one of these strategies and say, it's not quite right. So just because it's what you start with doesn't mean it's what you're going to end up with. So keep track of that. I want to just pause for a moment and provide you a reminder, and I'll put the link in the chat in a minute here, but we have tools for action. This strategy jumpstarter we have two documents. One, and we sent this in advance, is the 2026 combined RCC project plan strategy. So this is everything that you've told us you're doing up until this point is included in this document. Now, some of these may need to be refined or tweaked, but just so you know, this is the content that all of you are working on. And Erin has also put together a ecosystem strategy guide, which basically says for any systems change initiative, so it's not childcare specific, these are some things you can think about for your strategies. So if you didn't come with one or three strategies, or if you're like, I don't really like my strategies, these are good places for you to start poking around. Okay. Now we're actually going to go to our first breakout. So we're going to have 7 minutes, and what we're going to ask you to do first is to introduce yourself, share where your work group is in formation. Have you met? Are you doing work? Storming, norming, forming, however you want to kind of frame that out. And if you're far enough in that you think you could do a plan on a page, and then after talking about that, we're going to have you share what are the 3 big strategies that you brought and a strength of your work group. So we've got 7 minutes to do this. We have put all of you into groups if you told us in advance. If you haven't told us in advance, we're going to ask you to go to a section called Potpourri. So for any Jeopardy fans, that's Potpourri for 400. You'll go into that group, and then hopefully you'll have a little bit of a variety section with your team. So Liv, I'm going to ask you to start the sessions, and folks can self-select into where they are or hop to Potpourri. And if we get too many in any one section, we reserve the right to pull you. We want you to have time. So anything more than 4, and we're probably going to pull a person out of a group. So go ahead.
Sounds good. The rooms are all open, so you should either receive a notification or if you click on the breakout rooms button, it will give you the list of rooms that you can join. I see some people are self-selecting right
Great.
now, so we'll keep an eye.
And they put you in 5 for tri-tier.
Hi, Sable. Carrie, let's see. Okay, I know that probably went fast. It usually does. So hopefully you'll have some time in the follow-up sessions to dive in on it a little bit more. So we're going to move on from that foundational piece of the shared vision and talk a bit more about the learning and adaptation side of things, of that collaboration wheel. So on the right, sorry, I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so we've got right here, what you're looking at here is our big action learning process. And for folks who have seen this before, typically you might start in the understand section. This is a 3-phase process: understand, design, and act. Oftentimes you start in understand. Today we're actually going to start in design. And that's because you all have been understanding your coalitions, generating strategies, looking at data and information for your coalitions for quite some time. So we want to make sure we're catching you in the stream that you're in, not bringing you back to where you've already been. So the first thing we're going to do is really focus in on the design section and refining those prioritized strategies so that they're ready for action. We see this as we made it into 3 steps. It's really, maybe a couple more than that, but we're going to walk you through 3 big phases of this refine design section. So the first thing that we really need to do is prioritize, right? Many of you probably have a lot of good ideas that are coming up in your strategy, in your work groups. And the reality is you probably won't be able to do them all in the time frame that you have and with the resources that you have. So in order to really be effective, we need to first prioritize. Then we need to think about pulling in needed perspectives, additional voices to help us do this work. And then we've got some steps to really refine the strategies so that we can understand what things, how to make them sustainable and effective. For the purposes of this session, as we mentioned, we're going to be using municipal engagement of Region 11. And so this is text that we have from the documents that we've created. Advocate and provide assistance for local municipalities to adopt childcare friendly planning and zoning policies. I'm going to just stop quickly and say kind of a little bit of a warning that at this point, and even throughout this whole design phase, you may find that you need to flesh out the strategy so that everyone is on the same page. I just read to you the initial strategy description. I want you all to really trust your gut and your instincts on this strategy piece. So if you look at the bullet level strategies that you have and you go, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know who's actually going to be doing that. Or it feels like I can't put it into all these boxes that Jane and Aaron are saying I should be able to put it into. That is likely a flag that you need to refine it a little bit more. So, for example, this is how we started the strategy out. But in conversation with Aaron, as we were going through these slides, we really saw that we needed to have even more detail for us to do the work of the slides. So we took that opportunity to say, hey, let's actually highlight that in the deck to show that like this is an iterative process. So the fleshed out strategy description is that planning and development support agencies in the region will meet with local municipalities that they have existing relationships with and encourage them to conduct a zoning audit to see how their policies align with the goals, share best practices, and provide support to help municipalities make needed changes and to those policies. So you'll see how that fleshed out strategy comes into play here. Okay, so of moving into a little bit more detail, when we talk about prioritizing, especially if we think about the next 5 months of time from now to the next 5 months, we are encouraging you to prioritize 1 to 3 project plan strategies for your work group. If you're a work group that has 13 strategies right now, take a pause. We need to narrow that down because we can't effectively do all of those things. We can't do it all at once, and we can't do it all by ourselves. Let's remember that those first slides that we had. So the question is, what do we do? And we don't want you to think about, a chicken and egg paradox where you just get in a cycle of which things should come first. We're really encouraging you to prioritize based on the following criteria. Now you're going to adjust it a little bit for your coalition perhaps, but this is what we would suggest starting with. Is it aligned with your goals? Does it have momentum? Will it build momentum? So those are the 3 kind of starting criteria. If you can't get past those 3 gates, you're probably not going to be able to do that strategy. And after evaluating that, we can ask ourselves, is the capacity there? Or could we build it, right? Do we actually have the people to do this strategy? Is the timing right? That's very context specific. For something like municipal engagement, if the 3 counties that you're working with all just went through their master planning and it just got signed, sealed, and delivered, might not be the right time for municipal engagement, right? So we got to think about timing, and will it have impact? Now, some folks on the call might want to see that impact as the first bullet point. We're encouraging you to actually put that later because we can think of a lot of things that have impact that maybe don't have capacity, timing, momentum, or alignment. So we're putting that as one of the finals. Okay. The next, so what we're going to do now is actually walk through doing this priority exercise with Erin and I. And I'm going to put on a hat. When I wear this, I am the Region 11 facilitator. So this is my favorite radio station in Minnesota, but for now, pretend like it's in Northern Michigan. Okay, here we go. Region 11. These are strategies that we have put together, and we're going to be talking about sharing best practices with high impact municipalities and 3 to 5 zoning audits of high impact cities. Can you tell that I was a theater kid? Okay, Erin, your turn. Now you tell us who you are.
Hey Jane, so great to be here today. I just was shoveling outside. Sorry, I'm kind of sweaty here. I got my hat on, but I'm the work group lead for the municipal group for Region 11. Really excited to talk to you.
Great. So let's talk about our priorities for these 2 strategies, starting first with sharing best practices with high impact municipalities. Does this strategy align with the region's vision and goals?
It's definitely aligned. We looked at that at another meeting, and we have some momentum given some of the outreach we've been doing. And I think we could really see it building some momentum too. I would say a check for all 3 of those.
Okay. How about the 3 to 5 zoning audits?
Oh boy. Well, it's aligned. And we know it's going to build momentum, Jane, but I just don't know if we have the momentum yet. I think we need to talk with some other people to see if there's even an appetite for this work going forward.
Okay. But you think it'll build momentum?
I think so.
Okay. So with these 3, let's start with share best practices, and we're going to go to the next 3 priorities. So let's talk about capacity. Do you actually have capacity to share those best practices?
Definitely. Or we could build it because there's enough of the regional planning folks in our region who are interested in this.
Okay. And how about timing?
Yep. Good timing. Compared to some other regions, we really haven't made a whole lot of progress with municipal work. So this is a ripe time.
Okay. And how about impact?
considering what the providers have been telling us, who've been trying to expand some of the barriers they've been encountering, I think this could have a big impact and give us some additional momentum with the wins that we get.
That's great. So I actually wanted to go back to the zoning audits, and I'm wondering if you have ideas for how we could figure out the momentum piece. Who do we need to talk to?
Yeah, I think we should definitely talk to some of the municipal folks in the region and just see, if a zoning audit is something that would even be at all in their wheelhouse, and maybe talk to some of the other EDO colleagues just to see what else they know.
Wonderful. Okay. So what we have there, just like we went and did it, and now we know that there's momentum. So that's time passing because Aaron's team went and talked. Okay. So how about capacity, timing, and impact? We found out that all three of those are ready to go. Right, Aaron?
Right.
Okay. Wonderful. So this is maybe a little silly, but you can hang with us on this. This is what it could look like to go through this priority matrix for your session. So we have this document will again, it's in your template, and I'm going to give you a link in the chat when we do our work groups so that you can the breakout so that you can do this. So now we're going to talk about pull-in needed strategies for the prioritized strategy. So once you've said, okay, these are the 1 or 3 things we're going to do, then you get to ask yourself, who has really weighed in on these? I think what I've heard from some of the coalitions is that, maybe these strategies were drafted in less than ideal scenarios, right? For input. Or maybe they're feeling like we've got a lot of the similar voices that we've had for a long time, and the strategies are really sounding familiar. If that's the case, or in the case of, the municipal strategy where we just weren't sure, we need to bring in additional voices that can get us not just to refine the strategy, but really push that ceiling up, increase the ideas and diversity of ideas that we have. So this is another way of just saying, what else can we do to bring people in so that we can have good and new ideas? Sorry, there we go. There's the image for the strategy ceiling. Here's typically what it might sound like. When we bring in more or different voices, we can increase that ceiling. I want to encourage you also to know that you can really assess this for what you're able to do. This does not mean that you need to have 7 different listening sessions around your region. Although if you can, could be wonderful, but you really need to consider the need and scale that's possible for where you are. And I would encourage you to use your work group members. There's expertise in your networks. They can give a couple of phone calls, talk to folks to just get an early perspective on your strategies. It doesn't need to be so onerous that it takes months and months. This really can be just getting people's gut reactions to what you're doing. And we encourage you to do it so that folks can really begin to also feel understanding and ownership of what's going on in the work groups. Okay, so here's your opportunity for your second breakout. We're going to give you a little bit more time than what's on here. We're going to ask you to pick one strategy from your pre-work and talk through the priority matrix of one of your strategies, and then talk about something that you could do to push up your strategy ceiling, expand who's in the room, or getting feedback on your strategies. And then go to the next person's strategy. So we'll put this content in the chat. I'm also going to put a link to a Google document that has the priority matrix, like the table, and you can type in there if you find that helpful as you go. So that'll take me a minute, but we'll get that going here. Liv or Sable, if you can start the breakouts, we still have the same, go back to where you were. So if you switched from what's on this document on the slide, go back to where you were. All right.
Be sure to start the recording again. All right, welcome back everyone.
Muted.
Can you make sure, by the way, to mute yourself if you're not talking?
I'm still not muted, LOL.
That's okay. Thanks, Etta. It's hard to remember. All right, welcome back. So I just wanted to get a sense from folks if this conversation was like a little bit more tricky than the first one. Can you was it more tricky or easier than the first one. What did people think? A little bit trickier? Yeah, Elizabeth is like, yeah, I mean, it does get a little bit more complex when you really get into the work. And that's why it's so wonderful to have a work group, because then you have comrades to help you through some of this, to just continue to try to make the best next decision. And what we're going to talk about next is once you've prioritized where to start and you have kind of the dream team perspectives engaged in the conversation, what does it take to then like use some of that to refine those strategies so that they're ready to start testing and moving to implementation? And I just wanted to note, there was a comment in the chat right before we left that Lisa had mentioned about like, what happens if we've already submitted our project plans and our budgets, but some of these things might change? I think just something that we all have to accept as a reality is that evolution of the work is not only unavoidable, but it's a good thing. And I know I've heard Joan in progress meetings really be clear that we're hoping and expecting that the work will evolve as we learn more. And there's always ways to adjust, even with budgets, to have budget amendments, and really focus on what's the work that's most important now and not get so constrained with some of the limitations that may or may not actually be there. So we can talk more about that in other offline things, but just know that evolution is something that should be expected, and it's not a scary thing, it's a good thing. So here are some ways to think about how you might want to refine those prioritized strategies that you fleshed out and people are starting to kind of come around. So the first thing to think about is really think through, are there any other root causes going on in this situation that we need to think about to really fully flesh out this strategy so we know it's going to work or we think it's going to work? So for example, why is it that those zoning policies in municipalities aren't yet aligned with childcare? There could be a number of different reasons that would be important to surface. So whatever strategies you're refining will make sure they're actually dealing with those things and not just based on your assumptions. Jane and I are going to show you another example of how to do that in a minute. The next thing to think about in refining is, what's the strategy's impact? In prior times, I would have referred to this as equity impact. But basically, you're making sure that your strategy is designed to reach and benefit all the people and settings that need it most. Again, we're going to model this in terms of that municipal strategy in a second to really show you what does it take to think through how do we make sure this strategy is actually going to get to the places that it's needed most. Third, you want to think through, of these strategies we've prioritized and we're refining, how can we make sure that it's self-sustaining? So in other words, how can you design this strategy so that the changes it's going to create keep on happening even after you're gone? It's like planting a perennial in a garden versus an annual or an evergreen tree. So for example, how can organizations embed best practices into their operations so they keep on having an impact? How can trainings be embedded into ongoing professional development or higher education, etc.? How can we like embed things into the ecosystem, into the systems and structures that we live in so that they keep on naturally happening even after we're gone? So Denise from Region 3 works in a lot of municipal planning and development work, and she's been helping municipals embed childcare goals into their master planning so that automatically over time, some of the zoning policies that are coming out will start to align with that master plan. So it keeps on having dividends over time and keeps on aligning the work with supply building goals because it's been embedded in something that will continue. That's like examples like that are great to try to think through in a work group so that you make that strategy as powerful as it can be and sustainable as it can be. And then finally, think about what needs to be put in place before your strategy is even launched to make sure that it can be implemented successfully. So there's a bunch of research on implementation out there, and they found that no matter how well the strategy is designed, a big chunk of the success is dependent on how well it's implemented. So if you had to guess from 0 to 100% of a strategy's effectiveness, how much influence do you think implementation has on the ultimate success from 0 to 100? Put it in the chat. Wow, okay, you guys are like typically I get like 10, 15. You are way, so it's 50%. Maybe some places it's as high as 80, but 50% is typically what researchers have found, which is still a really big percent, because think of how much time we put into design. And oftentimes we put like 0 time into thinking through implementation. And so it's things like, do people have the skills they need to carry out what you're asking them to do? Do they have the knowledge or the connections or even the mindset and the buy-in to do what the strategy entails? And what we know is if you build those implementation conditions, people's skills, people's connections, whatever else needs, infrastructure that needs to be built, before you launch, you're more likely to be successful and less likely to be derailed by implementation barriers that will come up. So you want to anticipate and address as many implementation issues before you launch and deal with them, and then constantly be monitoring as you go. Okay, so Jane and I are going to model this a little bit for you. And Jane is going to be the facilitator, and I am going to be an assortment of work group members. So let's begin the conversation, Jane. Jump it off.
Great. Just had to unmute. Okay. Okay. So Region 11, let's talk a bit about what else in the local context is influencing the fact that municipal policies aren't aligned with supply building goals. Why is it the way it is?
Well, I'm a planner. By the way, is it kind of cold in here? I gotta put my hat on. So I'm a planner, regional planner. And I know in my work with municipal leaders, I've learned that a lot of them wouldn't even have the resources they need to be able to make changes to their zoning policies, even if they wanted to. They're just, their bandwidth is so small that this would just put it over the edge. So that they just don't have the resources they need.
Okay, and given what we've talked about in the strategy description that we have, does our strategy actually address that? Or do we need to do something else in our strategy to help make that attend to the fact that the funding is an issue?
Well, I'm part of the Funders Collaborative, and I would say the strategy definitely doesn't address this enough. But, we've been having a lot of conversations, and I wonder if it would be wise to connect those municipals to local philanthropists, and other funding sources so that that funding would be there and address that issue, that root cause.
That's a great idea. Let's make sure we capture that in our notes so we can get to the Funders Collaborative to address that. Okay, now we're going to talk about impact. It's always that fast and easy. Okay, now we're going to talk about impact. Do we think this strategy is designed to reach and benefit the municipalities and the childcare providers that actually need it the most? I'm trying to think about what we've seen from our MSU maps of need, as well as what we're hearing from the provider feedback survey. So who can help us think through how the strategy that we have is addressing those areas of greatest need?
Well, so Jane, I'm looking at this data, these maps, and some of this provider feedback, and I'm looking at these regions that are of the highest need. And I know that our EDO doesn't work a lot in those municipalities. We just don't have those connections.
Okay. So that's helpful. I'm wondering if there's anybody who does work with those municipalities, or if there's a way that we could reach out to other EDOs who maybe have experience in those areas.
Yeah, I could definitely reach out to some colleagues and ask them that, because I don't know. You're right.
Great. So let's make sure that we write that down as an action item.
All right.
So that we can get that done. Okay. So you can imagine that entire process happening throughout the entire throughout the next sections. We're going to just kind of fast forward a little bit on this, but I do want to just Erin, actually I'll pass to you about noting the facilitation components of it.
Yeah, I mean, as you're going through this, one tip I would recommend highly is to have some way to document it, even if it's like turning on an AI note taker so that you really capture what's going on. Make sure that you're capturing detailed information. And whoever the facilitator is, note how Jane paused the group, clarified the action, and would have put enough detail around that action so that my character would know exactly what to do. And they're not like left sort of wondering, because that's a recipe for people not taking action. So anytime an action item comes up, even if it's small, you pause the group, you make sure someone has identified that they're going to do it, and you make sure to sort out the details so that they're feeling comfortable doing that. And in fact, after that call, you might even want to connect with them afterwards just to make sure they remember and that they don't have anything getting in the way. So again, you're documenting this. We're going to talk a little bit more later about how to do that easily. And this version of what we're doing, again, you're not doing this with 100 strategies. So it looks like it's really in depth, but if you're only focused on a couple strategies, this level of refinement really makes a big difference for the power of your strategies. And so remember, this isn't like you're doing it for a huge list. You want to go deep on a few things that you are really confident could make a difference, and then make them as good as you can make them. And so that's the process that we're modeling here. Okay, so yep, perfect. So this slide, maybe what some folks are feeling like, oh my God, how do I keep track of all this? Erin, you just said I need to document it, but this is a lot of information, and how do I keep track of it all? So fortunately, we have a template for that. That could be like a tagline that Jane and I have. We have a template for that. So not only do we have a model of what Jane and I were just talking about that's fleshed out, but here's a table that basically has all of those key things we talked about in the design phase. Do you have the right level of detail? Let's clarify it. Do we have the right people in the conversation? Let's expand that ceiling. Have we considered root causes? Impact consequences? Is it self-sustaining? And are we going to have implementation considerations? So there's the questions you can ask in the pink row, and then an example of some of the things that you would want to get to in that conversation, kind of the level of detail. And then there's a version of this that's blank. And so if in your work groups you're having these conversations, you can actually take notes right into this table to keep track of it and have a new table for each strategy that you've prioritized. It's something you can also make into a Google Doc so other folks can add to it and everyone has access to it. So know that that's available for you. All right, so we're going to keep going around our adaptive action learning cycle. So we started with design. Now we're going to truck over to act. And this is really about testing out those strategy ideas that you were just refining. And there's a couple things to think about. One is, first, you identify what are the biggest assumptions we're making about this strategy. Let's surface those so that we can test them and get some rapid feedback and make refinements to our strategy if we need to. Because remember, Jane said in the very beginning, we have to acknowledge that we're never going to get this right the first time. Let it go. It's never going to happen. It's okay. It's normal. It's human. And so let's be smart about it and know that we need to learn and refine. So again, we're going to use that municipal example to go through here. So when you think about assumptions, here's two questions you might want to ask in your work group. What's needed for this strategy to work? Like, what would need to be in place? What would need to be true? What would be needed for this to work? And then two, what could cause it to fail? Now, if you have any people in your work group who love to play devil's advocate, this is their moment to shine, guys. So let that out and really think critically about some of these assumptions, because the more assumptions you highlight now that you can test, the more solid your strategy is going to be and less prone to get derailed. So again, Jane and I are going to think through some assumptions. Here's some that might come up in a group as they ask the work group around assumptions. Jane, I'm just going to walk through these instead of going back and forth. So, let's say the question is asked in the work group, what's needed for this strategy to work, this municipal strategy, what could cause it to fail? People might say things like, well, those municipal leaders you're working with, they have to even be interested in this in the first place. Two, they have to understand some of the childcare best practices that we're sharing with them. If the language is off, or if it's just like not making sense, that would cause our strategy to fail. Or finally, we need to again investigate, do they have the time and money needed for this, even if we connect them to those philanthropy funders? Because that's still an assumption. And so here's 3 types of assumptions that could come up in that conversation and that you track them. Okay, these are really important ones. Let's figure out the most important ones we want to test. Perfect. Keep going, Jane. And then you find simple ways to test them out and get some rapid feedback. And so, again, let's use that municipal example. Jane, let's actually model this. So Jane is going to be the facilitator of the work group again.
Great. So let's think through how we can poke at these assumptions a little bit. Who can we talk to, or what do we need to do to see if people are going to be interested, if they're going to understand it, or if they have the resources they need?
Well, by the way, again, it's so sunny in this room. Wow. I was talking to Ryan from QPAD in Region 1. He's another regional planner up there. And he was talking about how he was going to test out some of the ideas they had related to municipal work with some of the municipal leaders that he automatically has contracts with. And there's some upcoming gatherings and trainings that he was going to kind of like test some ideas out. And I thought that was a really good idea. He thought about like what's coming up in the next 3-4 months, and he picked spots where there would be a lot of other municipal leaders already there for some conferences and trainings. And he was finding ways to just start floating some of these ideas and getting some feedback.
That's great. So let's build off of that. What if we plan to meet with 1 or 2 leaders, sharing case examples of the best practices, engaging their interest? We could then also ask them about time and resource constraints for those policy changes and additional funds. Who do we know that could do that and has ability in the next couple of weeks to do that?
Well, I'm the municipal, I'm still part of the planning and development group, and I know I've got a couple meetings coming up with 2 municipalities next month. I could easily run some of these things by them, and we have a good relationship, so I know there's going to give me good feedback. I could certainly do that. That wouldn't be too much of an ask.
Great. And then once you do that, why don't you circle back to the rest of the group via email or in our next call, and we will get the outcome of those discussions.
Perfect. All right.
All
So
right.
go ahead, Jane. Why don't you introduce this one?
Yep. So for this next breakout, you guys are going to have a chance to have a couple of minutes to yourselves. This is going to be self-timed. So for the first 2 minutes, I want you to just pick one of your strategies and individually write out, anywhere between 3 to 5 strategy assumptions, what's needed for it to work or what could make it fail. And then go into your group right away, but then just share your assumptions with the group. So the first thing is just going to be for you to write down something, a couple notes on your own, and then share assumptions with the group. Then pick one person's assumptions and brainstorm ways to test them out. So at the end of this, one of you will have a couple of tests and an action plan, even if it is hypothetical, that you can go to for your strategy. So again, go to your groups and hop in. If we could get that going, Liv or Sable, that'd be great. Oops. Gonna be tight, Aaron. We got it.
Yep, we got it. All right, welcome back, everyone. We just have a couple last things to finish up before we end. So we're gonna go keep moseying on through. You can animate it, Jane. Moseying on through our action learning cycle. And just note that we front loaded this in design because that's what you're starting with. And we're spending the least time in understand because that's where you're gonna go, and we can continue to support you as you go. So with understand, you've started to test things out, you're gathering some feedback from folks. There's really like 3 questions that systems thinkers and evaluators really focus on to learn quickly and use in feedback and information to make good decisions. So the first question is, what did we learn? What did people say? What happened? What resulted from what we did? What did we see? Two, so what? So what does that mean for what we need to do differently? So what does that mean for what we should keep doing? Like, what is the implications for us? Why does it matter? And then the third is now what? So given what needs to change, given what we need to keep the same, what are the action steps we need to do next? And who can take part in that? How do we coordinate it? Again, sometimes that means you're going to redesign your strategy. Sometimes that means the strategy is working and you move it to more kind of next phases of implementation. And again, we have a template for that. And so there's a nice little way that you can keep track of these conversations in a work group and document it so that you can use that information to improve. Now, speaking of taking notes. So how many people hate taking notes? Like everyone should raise their hand, right? The good news is there's ways that you can simplify this using some technology. And so we have some supports in this fabulous kind of like toolkit that Jane has pulled together around how do you train AI to help you take effective notes. And there's simple ways that you can start highlighting aspects of what's coming up in the conversation so that you can use it quickly and you can send it in to like evaluators like me who can help to understand what's happening across all coalitions. So highlighting things like what are changes to our strategies? Let's highlight those in pink. What are we learning from our tests? Highlight those in yellow so we can quickly look through our notes and use them for what we need them to do. So check out that toolkit. It's got some really good ideas on how to train your AI dragon to start helping you in note taking. All right, Jane, why don't you take us home?
So you might be feeling, I know it's 2:45 or 3:45, so I'm mindful of that time. You may be feeling like, oh, well, how do I even start? I want you to encourage you to look at slides 14 to 15 and think about your shared vision and goals for your work groups. Looking at refining your prioritized strategies, and I've got a list of agenda meeting templates and other resources that would be helpful for you. And then lastly, start trying things out. Look at that agent, the change agent guide from ECIC and Weaving Change. And here's where I want to encourage you all to push yourselves on timeline. Now, this isn't a compliance thing. I'm not telling you there's a deadline, but I'm encouraging you to think about, could I do these first two steps before the next coalition meeting? Get those visions and goals ready and to refine my prioritized strategies. And could I start having a what, so what now, what, so what, now what cycle before the fall coalition meeting? If you're like, we can do that before July, great, go at it. We encourage you to share the April 10th session with your colleagues or come again if this felt like a lot. We've got several resources for you that we'll send out in advance. And I'm going to skip the fist to five here because I know we don't have time. But we are going to be sending out a survey, a feedback survey for you all. You can tell us if you liked the hats or not, among other things. So hopefully you did like the time that you had with your colleagues and that was helpful. I know we always want more time with you for the content and with the meeting. So thank you so much for your time today. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everybody. Oh, Elizabeth likes the hats. All right, there we go. And the